1525 to 2025. 500 years have passed since Martin Luther held the first Protestant worship service in Wittenberg. One wonders, what would he say if he could walk at city streets today where less than 10% identify as Christian? And what would he think if he stepped inside All Saints Church, past the door that held his 95 Theses, and heard a sermon given by the Regent's Bishop on Easter Sunday? After all, he did challenge Rome most valiantly at his trial in Worms, risking execution to defend the primacy of grace in salvation. That would eventually lead him to pen the now famous declaration that justification is the chief article of the Christian faith. Look, there's no doubt God raised Luther to recover a truth that medieval Catholicism had practically lost, namely that the righteousness of God is a gift that one receives by faith alone. This dawning revelation on Romans 1:17, that the righteous shall live by faith, lifted Luther from spiritual despair. It was the answer to his crushing introspection. But in the process, he also set aside the reality of God's righteous judgment, as he did James, Hebrews, and the book of Revelation. Ever since, Protestant theology has solely anchored justification in this alien righteousness, the gift of Christ's perfect merit imputed to believers. God declares them righteous, not for anything in them. And that is the sum of the matter. Likewise, the Catholic Church hasn't budged. The Council of Trent still holds. Justification is not only a remission of sins, but also sanctification and renewal of the inward man in which he is made righteous, becoming an heir to the hope of eternal life. But more than 5 centuries after the duel between Luther and Cardinal Cajetan at Augsburg, the debate on justification rages on. How can a man be right with God? That is still the ultimate question for any believer today. It shouldn't be surprising that the joint declaration by Lutherans and Catholics of 1999 failed to resolve the major points of contention. The two sides remain deadlocked. But what's quite revealing is this: there's still considerable disagreement today on the doctrine within Protestantism. It began with Melanchthon wrestling with Luther on the relation of renewal to justification. Then it was Calvin versus Osiander on the role of the Spirit, Piscator versus Beza on the nature of imputed righteousness, Baxter versus Owen on the role of works, Wesley versus Whitfield on assurance, Norman Shepherd versus Westminster on final justification, Gaffin and Westminster versus Michael Horton and Westminster, California on union with Christ, the Federal Vision versus the PCA, John Piper versus N.T. Wright and the New Perspective on Paul, and the list goes on. Now, if justification had been definitively settled by Protestants, why so little agreement among them? 500 years after that first message at Castle Church, we still need reform. Both Protestants and Catholics have fallen short. Protestants see justification as a single, definitive act. It's not, because as we'll see, the righteousness of God is polysemic. Catholics teach justification as a process. Instead, it's a twofold reality. The root of these errors lies in a defective understanding of the righteousness of God. Neither the Catholic Church nor Luther, Calvin, or their theological descendants have done a detailed study of the Hebrew root SDQ, from which the Bible derives all related words for righteousness and justification. There are 526 occurrences of these across 500 verses, and they paint an amazing mosaic, one that Luther, Calvin, and the Catholic Church couldn't put together in their day because of the sheer amount of data involved. Today, it's not uncommon for articles and sermons to quote a couple of verses like Exodus 23:7 or Proverbs 17:15 and conclude, see, it's forensic, but that comes short of the term's complexity. There's no way around this. To firmly understand justification, one has to scale this Everest that is the concept of righteousness in the Hebrew Bible. This might not be evident at first to the layman and English reader. Justify, justification, and righteousness or righteous don't seem related, at least phonetically. But this is only because English is a mixed language influenced by an Anglo-Saxon base and Latin. The word justify is derived from the Latin word justificare, but righteousness is an Anglo-Saxon word. In Greek, however, there's no distinction between the two. The verb to justify is dikaion, the noun righteousness is dikaiosune, and the adjective righteous is dikaios. This common dik root in the Greek is also reflected in the Hebrew language. The SDQ root gives rise to words like the verb tzadak, the nouns tzedakah and tzedek, and the adjective tzaddik. Michael Horton is professor of systematic theology at Westminster, California. In his 2-volume set on justification, he points to Lee Irons' dissertation. He calls it the most important lexical study of righteousness to appear in recent decades. Irons concluded that the righteousness of God is his distributive justice, and that justification is a judicial declaration that one is righteous. But is he right? In this 7-part series, I will cross-examine his monograph with a view to assessing the Reformer's understanding of justification. The roadmap for our journey looks like this. Section 2 begins with a look at Irons' lexical semantics model and offers an alternative based on Cotterell and Turner's suggestions. Section 3 is a statistical and qualitative analysis of the SDQ root word and its 4 cognates, tzaddik, which is the most frequently occurring term, followed by tzedakah, tzedek, and sadak. Section 4 is the heart of the matter, a review of Irons' reasoning on Herman Kramer's work. Kramer originated the idea of the righteousness of God as faithfulness to the covenant, but Irons rejects this in favor of God's righteousness as purely justitia distributiva, or distributive justice. Section 5 will then survey Paul's usage of the phrase and offer an overview of 40 different scholars' interpretations. Section 6 will then positively lay out the doctrine, followed by a critique of the Reformed view on union with Christ, the covenant of works, and Christ's active obedience, in addition to a critique of Article 6 of the Council of Trent. Finally, Section 7 will summarize our journey and consider the implications for the assurance of the believer and the church. After all, justification is indeed the article upon which she stands or falls. A word of warning, as you may have already noticed, this series is not intended for the layman, but rather for seminary professors, theologians, and pastors. That said, everyone is invited to watch. With that, let's begin. I'll see you in Section 2.